Well, hey, hi, Glenn here, workshop at the Gardens, and yes, we just finished putting another purlin up there. We've got 3 purlins left to go, but in the series of videos, this work that I'm gonna go through in this video started early in the fall before any of the timbers were even cut, and that's putting the footings in and then building the brackets. So I'm gonna walk you through that whole process for the welcome pavilion here at the Gardens. Well, there's no better place to start than at the very beginning, and this is the corner. It might be obvious to talk about the welcoming pavilion, and the idea is that from the parking lot, when you go into the main area at the Gardens, this will welcome you. It'll be wayfinding. This is where you go when you're standing in the parking lot looking at an area. There were a couple of cedar trees, probably 70, 80, 90 years old, that needed to be removed. Those were taken out in a very rough sketch on what this was going to become and how the footings were going to get installed. Al, our concrete guy, came out, and this is fall, this is November, and just before things start to freeze up a little bit, so still beautiful out. But we did punched in the 4 footings with our auger, 24-inch wide, a lot of rebar, as you can see, a lot of number 5, so that's 1/2-inch rebar. And then I got the tubes all set in place, rebar on the inside, that's where they're wrapped in there, and all leveled up. It'll be pretty amazing. I mean, these first pictures that you see of what this area looks like to when we finish it will be a pretty dramatic change. But here we are, the concrete truck is here, the tubes are all set, and we did a nice job of getting them all level. That's why we used the laser, but there will be a lot of grading that'll happen to this area on there. The concrete truck was here. We did some curbing as well, so we kind of got that there. That's the picture of the rebar that I added afterwards. So there's the number 5, 1/2-inch, and then I came back and put 4 more 3-foot pieces in, so they go in 2 feet and about 8 to 10 inches stick out. And then Al laid up some concrete blocks, again using the laser and making sure that the top ones were spot on, equal to each other. And then what I don't have footage, and I don't have any pictures of, is when he core filled those CMU blocks and then dropped in 2 5/8-inch anchor bolts. So all of those footings, pillars, whatever you want to call them, I have 2 anchor bolts in each one of them. And sometimes it's a little different than the way that I like to work. I do like to work measuring all that stuff out, but these got put in, so then I had to come up with a method to figure out exactly where those were. We cut some pieces of OSB, 24 by 24, and then drilled holes in them, figured out exactly where those bolts are, and that became our template or jig for each one of them. Metal was delivered thanks to Core-Mark Metal up in Minneapolis. They did a great job bringing metal down, so it's been a treat finding them. I don't have to go get metal anymore. They have a truck that comes right by and drops stuff off. First, we also added a couple Evolution power tools, which were pretty cool. The circular saw will cut up to 1/2-inch, so a lot of the stock that came in full size, we just used the Evolution circular saw and cut them right to size. And then I did use a chop saw to do the 3/4-inch. But the biggest plate, the 3/4-inch, the 24 by 24-inch plate, which we're drilling a hole in right now, that in essence is going to act as the cap of the pillar, footing pillar, not so much part of the bracket itself. So that's it's a longer story, and come on over someday and I'll buy you a beer. You can buy me a beer, and I can explain all the little nuances that go into figuring out design. And it just worked out that we were going to put this nice 24-inch cap on top. I ended up with the 16-inch CMUs, which would have made it really tough to do a stone cap, and I'm like, my goodness, 3/4-inch plate steel would look really cool on top of stone, so that's what we did. Price-wise, I think they're right around $200 a piece, which may sound like a lot, but a stone cap of that size is probably going to be close to 400. So this is actually cheaper, and it's going to be pretty cool. The other evolution tool that we added, and there's Eagle Eye, was a mag drill. And I've always wanted a mag drill, and it was just time, because in the end, I don't even know how many holes. This, there's 2 anchor bolts in each footing, so the total of 8. And we had the cap plate, and then we had the actual bracket to drill, plus, so there's just a lot of holes to punch. And adding a mag drill with the annular bits is really cool, and that was pretty stellar. All right, welding up the caps, the riser caps as I call them. This is what will cover up the bolts, the nuts on top of the anchor bolts, and then also provide the drip edge. A little bit later, you'll see a couple really good pictures of how the caps cover up the bolts on there. But pretty simple. This is, the timbers are 10 by 10, so an inch all the way around. These are 8-inch by 8-inch with a 2.5-inch, quarter-inch bar stock as the riser, so they become a really simple weld. Made a jig last time. All right, time to lay out the bottom plates, and this was that, using that jig where we transferred the holes, transferred the center mark for all of the anchor bolts that are on the piece there. So yeah, wow. It's kind of fun doing the time lapse, but it really does get there. But once we have those, then we'll start punching the holes into the 12 by 12. So those are the actual brackets, which are 12 by 12, and the mag drill is just performing fabulous there. And then each of those, so then we do all 4 of the the base there on the brackets, and we had already done all the ears on the upside, but just kind of keep measuring them out. And then we'll finish punching all of the holes in on each of the bracket bases. Then welding them up, the ears will go up from there. So I think what we ended up doing is adding an extra 1/8 inch, which sounds like not very much, but it's a lot. But the last time I made these brackets, I made them exactly the size of the timbers, and we fought just a little bit to get the timbers in. They fit, but they were just snug. The concept was, I think we actually went like 3/16, so each side ended up being maybe an 1/8 inch on each side of the bracket. And when you put the bolts in there, that'll suck that all up and not even make a difference. But I can't tell you how cool the mag drills are. I'm sure you've used one, but in the annular bits, they just are so sweet and so clean, punching all these holes in there. Compared to the drill presses that I was using. We did add a Bridgeport to the workshop, but that's not set up yet, so maybe in the future you'll see us punch some holes with a Bridgeport, and that'll actually be pretty cool. All right, clean up that little welding table. Put a little video up there on, making the welding table, the layout table. It's kind of cool. Get that all cleaned up, and then we will start welding these brackets together. Now I have a wood jig on the inside. That one is, the 10-inch piece there. We added a few little shims in there to get that extra. But that will get these perpendicular, and as you see, we put the ears, that's what I call them, the pieces on the outside. Now there's a whole bunch of different ways that you can make brackets for timber framing. To each their own. I really want the bracket forward, the metal forward. I don't want to put a spline and make it disappear. I want to see the big, heavy piece of metal with the wood and the stone. If you know what I do here at the workshop at the Gardens, at stone, wood, steel, and I want all those to be right out in front. My trusty Eltec welder, which I think Eltec became ESAB, and so you'll see it as ESAB, and everybody has these new fancy welders with digital readout and stuff. This is just a good old dial welder. MIG welder, can't say I'm the greatest welder, but 25, 30 years later of just, putting things together, I've picked up some decent skills, and it's kind of fun putting these brackets together as we weld them. Tacked them in on both sides, all the way around. That's actually a pretty nice view of the brackets. With the light there, you can see all the holes that we had to punch. Offset the holes on the ears, so when we put the bolts in, they don't run into each other. But I'm doing a weld all the way around the ear to the base plate, have it pretty hot. Plus we also did a little bit of grinding and tapering to get that so we'd have a nice solid weld. You have to remember that most brackets that people use for a timber frame or anything, and they're what makes coater those flimsy little galvanized things. So we have a 3/4 inch plate, 12 by 12 on the bottom. It's a 6 inch by 18 inch, 1/2 inch bar stock for the ears. So I'm pretty sure they're going to be strong enough. Yeah, they will be. But, you know, laying down that weld all the way around, welding is so much fun. I'm sure you know that. All right, so once we get the welding done, we will do a little bit of cleanup, and cleanup is just going to be the wire brush, knocking all the stuff around, and then I'll do a little additional sanding with the flap disc. All right, and as far as, you don't see all the 4-inch grinders that I have, but I think you should have a grinder for every kind of application. So I think I have 6 or 7 grinders there, because I have each grinder has its own disc or wire wheel on it, so you don't have to stop and change. It just is, they're so inexpensive that you just do that. So you grab the next one that has the flap disc, and we clean that all up, and then the brackets will be ready to go. Well, not quite ready to go. We still have to put a coating on them. Coating says that they have to be a metal and they have to have some type of protection on them. So we'll end up doing a linseed oil where we'll bring them up to temperature and we'll seal them with linseed oil. But it's nice to have all the sharp points, and so that's where I'll go in there and go in there and grind everything down so I have no sharp points, because all of this will be accessible as people walk by. They can touch it, feel it, and not get a cut or anything. It's always possible if somebody falls over, but can't, help everyone. There we go. All welded up, the risers, the brackets, the plates. Now it's time to seal them, as I was talking about. This is fun. I have a big, huge, I think they call them weed torch, but it's just, I heat the metal up to about 700 degrees, let it fall back to the 550 range, and then hit it with linseed oil. The first time we did this, it was a little bit of a rodeo. We were using 20-pound tanks, and that just doesn't work, because when you're using a torch at full speed, the gas doesn't have enough room to blossom, and you freeze out those 20-pound tanks. So this is, if you can see in there, there's a 100-gallon tank, and a 100-gallon tank code says you can have it next to a building, so there it is. But that just allows enough room for the gas to blossom and really hit that torch. And luckily we had a decent warm day, but it takes a little bit of heat to get a 24 by 24 3/4 inch plate of steel up to 700 degrees, but it's doable. At some point I will make I wouldn't call it a kiln. I don't know what I would call it, but a little bit more. I had the concrete blocks. That's a big old eagle eye there. He's always aware of where the camera is. But yeah, once it cools down to that 500, then you just start hitting it with the linseed oil. The linseed oil will polymerize, and that will create the rust protection for the metal. It's a really cool process. Standard blacksmithing, the cool part about it is they turn nice and black, and the color is just so rich and good. That little sizzling, maybe you can hear that. If it hits that water and the oil, yeah, it sounds there. And there's a really distinctive smell, not a bad smell, of the linseed oil toasting on 500 degree metal. So it's when we're doing brackets, definitely. All right, from there, yeah, look at that color. The color is just stunning. Absolutely love it. Well, we're going to bring them right over and kind of put them in place. We're not going to get them exactly set, but there we're going to, excuse me, take the jig off. We did scratch on all of the plates and the brackets which one they were, but through the process we kind of lost some of it. So we were close. We figured them all out, but we had to use the jig and line the holes up because they weren't all the same. But so a little conversation about how we're going to do it, because it's still warm, gloves on, lift it up, and it is really cool, and it all just falls in place. And that'll be the cap. Now when we hit spring, that's when I'll do the stonework, and I'll wrap that CMU with some Lannon stone, maybe Shilton. And then here is the bracket. So they don't look that big, but that's a 12 by 12 with 18-inch ears, and the 10 by 10 timbers will just slide right down inside of that. What we did before, really starting to cut the timbers, we went out and lined all of those up, and fast forwarding, we lined them all up so we could get exact measurements. And wasn't that beautiful? Did you see that? When you line everything up and get it all perfect, and having that extra 1/8 inch, these timbers just line, boom, just like that, fall right into place. It's pretty sweet. And a couple of screws in there. We're going to just hold them in place with some GRKs. I'll come back and put some 3/4 inch, 8-inch galvanized lags in there, because that'll be a really cool look. But just like that, it's in. All right, I'm going to run you through a couple of still photos. Just looking at the brackets installed, the cap, the big stone, and there's a nice picture here of Eagle Eye. There he is, Darwin, putting the bottom on the post, and that's right there. That's the riser, one hole that holds it there. If there's going to be some that would say, well, you can't adjust anything after the fact. Well, if you do it right from the get-go, you tighten your bolts down, you do all of that, you don't need any adjusting. There's Andrew. He was the lead on cutting all these timbers, getting them lined up in place, and dropping in. And it's a thing of beauty when all of the work, all of the measure 15 times cut once happens, and they all line up. Brackets are in place. They will get that 3/4 inch lag bolt, a pretty bulletproof. And now you kind of see where I say the metal is forward here. Well, thanks so much for following along. I hope you got some good, useful information on how we put the footings in, built the brackets. If you do have any questions, would love to answer them for you. Leave a comment down below, and there'll be a bunch more videos coming on all of this stuff. But anyways, that's going to do it on this one. Thanks so much for following along. Glenn here, Workshop at the Gardens. Cheers.